My name is Sandra Conway, but that name was never a shelter. It was never a legacy. It never opened doors for me, quite the opposite. In the Conway house, the name was a golden wall. To them, a symbol of local nobility. To me, a chain. A stamp burned into my skin with the word mistake. I had the same last name. But at family gatherings, it was as if I had been glued into the photos with tape. A piece that didn't belong. My childhood was an endless game of don't make a sound. I remember, with pain and clarity, the first time I understood what being unwanted meant. I was 8 years old. We were at my grandparents' mansion in Dunthorpe. A bright Christmas, full of lights twinkling in the smoky glass windows, and a pine tree that looked like it had been imported straight from Scandinavia. The children ran around the house with expensive toys, wrapped in metallic paper with satin ribbons. I got an old book, with a scrawled dedication that began with, "For Sarah." My name was Sandra. "It's just a writing error," my maternal grandmother murmured, without even looking at me. She turned to my aunt and continued, in a whisper loud enough to be accidental. "Daughter of someone who should never have been born." I pretended I didn't hear. But the words hit hard in my chest. Hot. Velvet on the outside. Poisonous on the inside. From that day on, I learned to sit up straight, silent, to smile when they mocked me, to appear grateful when they ignored me. My mother tried to protect me. She was everything they despised, dignified, hardworking, with no famous last name. A night shift nurse, daughter of Mexican immigrants who took pride in eating together at the same wooden table every day, even with little to put on it. When my father, William Conway, fell in love with her, the family reacted as if he had embarrassed the bloodline. They never accepted her, not even when she went silent, not even when he begged, not even when he died. He died too soon. I was 6. An accident on Highway 26, near Beaverton. He was returning from a conference tired at the end of a Friday. He fell asleep at the wheel. The car flipped. They said it was quick, that he didn't even feel it. But I felt it. I felt everything. His absence screamed so loudly inside the house that the silence became permanent. After that, we were alone. The Conway family, rich, powerful, influential, less than 20 minutes away, never offered help. Not a visit. Not a check. Not even a call on my birthday. Except, of course, the courtesy invitations to keep up appearances. Invitations to humiliate me with elegance. I remember the spring Sundays in Lake Oswego. Family parties. The Conways parading in their linen outfits, their loud laughter, their rehearsed smiles. I, in a borrowed dress with shoes that hurt my heels, smiling for the photos, not knowing where to put my hands. She has the name, but not the cut. My cousin Kate, 14, already molded in inherited venom, would say. "Sandra, darling, do you still wear your natural hair?" My Aunt Vanessa would ask with a tone that seemed to be concern, but was pure mockery. And then he would come. Always him. My Uncle Graham. Expensive suit, CEO posture, eyes as hard as steel. "You inherited the name, but not the worth." He would say this with a muffled laugh between sips of bourbon, always in front of others, always as a joke. And the others would laugh. They laughed as if they were watching a stand-up show. I was the recurring joke. As a teenager, I learned to disappear within my own thoughts. While the cousins showed off their cars given as gifts at 16, I took the bus to work in bookstores, cafes, anything that gave me an income and let me return home late, exhausted, but in control of myself. They called me poor thing, with soft voices. "Sandra works at a coffee shop. That's so humble. Means she's always been hardworking. She just didn't have the same opportunities." As if I were a charity project they had abandoned by accident. But what they didn't know, or rather what they refused to acknowledge, was that I saw everything. I overheard the muffled conversations about the company's movements, about wrong investments, doubtful contracts. I saw their eyes when they spoke of power, a gleam that mixed greed with the fear of losing it. And it was in that world that I grew up, surrounded by luxury that never belonged to me, by last names that should have commanded respect but gave me contempt. Until I left. I left their shadow, with a backpack, a scholarship, and an idea. I created Altura with what I had: knowledge, hunger, and well-stored anger. A logistics startup focused on delivery optimization technology. An industry no one in my family would ever look at twice, because it didn't shine, it had no glamour. But it had a future. In the first few months, I slept on the office floor. I ate whatever I could, learned what I didn't know, and surrounded myself with smart people but invisible, like me. Every line of code, every rejected investment pitch, every client convinced by sheer will, was a brick in the wall that would forever separate me from what they made me feel. Altura grew, slowly, steadily, quietly. And over time, it became a reference. Partner to large companies. A solution in critical moments. And still, never displaying my name on the facade. Because I knew that one day my name would return, but by my hands, not theirs. And while I prospered in silence, they kept laughing. Sandra is in one of those modern companies, the ones that don't make a profit but are always posting photos on Instagram, Graham said at a dinner, laughing with the others. They didn't even know Altura was already in the green and growing. But I wanted them to keep thinking I was a failure, because that's how I won. While they looked up, I dug underneath. Silent, invisible, but moving. And then, on a cloudy Tuesday afternoon, sitting with a cold coffee in my hand, my phone vibrated. A discreet notification from an old contact. Conway Industries begins private stock offering. 18% available for institutional acquisition. My body froze. My heart beat to the rhythm of an irreversible truth. They were opening the gate. The empire, untouched for decades, was offering gaps. And I knew, deep in my soul, that this was the moment. The moment to become invisibly powerful. I used everything I learned in the years of silence. Every sleepless night, every meeting I pretended not to understand, every muffled laugh I endured as if it were just another cold breeze. Everything had prepared me for this moment. It wasn't just about strategy. It was discipline, emotional surgery. I knew I couldn't slip up for even a second. The slightest misconduct, the smallest deviation, and they would have the perfect excuse to destroy me again. So my plan had to be perfect, legally irrefutable, impeccable in every line. The first piece of the puzzle was a bridge company, founded in Seattle, Grayworth Holdings. A generic, elegant name that could mean everything and nothing at the same time. Registered with discreet partners, protected by layers of legal representation. No direct ties to me, no clues. The next step was raising funds. We had reserves from Altura, of course. But it wasn't enough. I used the respect I had earned in the market, discreetly, of course, to attract anchor investors. Institutional investors hungry for solid opportunities and guaranteed returns. I showed data, plans, growth forecasts. I never mentioned the Conway name. It's a strategic acquisition, a family business with serious management issues and untapped potential, a golden opportunity for a partial entry. Why so reserved? Some asked. Because the current shareholders are sensitive and vain. And that was true. Conway Industries, once a symbol of stability in the infrastructure and construction sector in Oregon, had been stumbling. The world had changed, but they hadn't. Stubborn, arrogant, addicted to a rigid business model, they hid losses with accounting makeup and empty speeches at corporate dinners. They needed capital, but didn't want to give up the throne. That's when they decided to quietly open part of the shares to private investors. Something calculated, almost secret, limited to those who knew where to look. And I knew. It was like watching the castle accidentally open a trapdoor. Grayworth Holdings entered as a silent investor. Nothing aggressive, nothing suspicious. Just another name among the many that emerge when the water starts to rise and the rats look for solid ground. I used different legal teams for each acquisition. No office knew the entirety of the plan. Each contract, each clause, each transfer was recorded under completely independent structures. And every penny, clean. I wasn't going to make the same mistakes they did. With each round of investment, Grayworth gained more. More voice, more space, but always below the public visibility line. The Conway name never appeared, not in meetings, not in signatures. I was, for all intents and purposes, just another small partner with a random job, maybe still stuck in that too modern startup. My family continued laughing at my supposed insignificance. "Did you see Sandra's Instagram? She's selling logistics consulting now," my cousin Kate said, laughing with a glass of rosé in hand, at a lunch in Lake Oswego. "She doesn't have the greatness gene, but at least she tries," Graham responded, with that crooked smile of someone who never considered that the world could change without their permission. They ignored me, and that made me stronger. I was invisible, exactly as I wanted to be. The process lasted 8.5 months. It was weeks where I slept little and dreamed even less. I woke up in the middle of the night thinking about clauses. I redid scenarios in my mind, calculated risks that shifted with a sigh. Sometimes I felt fear, yes, not of failing, but of being discovered before the time was right. Because if they knew, if they suspected for a second that this meticulous operation was mine, they would do anything to stop me, and they would play dirty. There was one night I almost got caught. One of the lawyers, an experienced man from the real estate market, called me urgently. "Sandra, or better, Mrs. Miller, how should I address you now?" "I don't understand," I replied, freezing inside. "You know the Conways are starting to question who's behind the moves. They're paranoid. One of them believes there's internal sabotage." "Sabotage? We're not breaking any rules. But we're winning, and for them, that's worse than a crime." He was right. The family was starting to get suspicious. A new silent investor with solid proposals but firm demands was beginning to bother them. "Who is this Grayworth?" my Aunt Vanessa asked at an extraordinary meeting. "She has a lot of power for someone no one knows." But it was still too early to show my face. I kept buying in silence. A small block of shares here, another one there. Some sold by distracted cousins, others negotiated by indebted uncles who preferred to give up part of what they had rather than expose their numbers. I offered fair value, never pressured, never drew attention. And every new acquisition came with an extra layer of care. Confidentiality agreements, legal shields, layers upon layers of protection. Once my mother called me. "They're saying the Conways are losing power, that someone is buying up the scraps." "Scraps?" I asked with a smile she couldn't see. "That's what they're calling it. They say only someone very naive would invest in a sinking ship." I laughed. But inside, it was just silence and fire. The last negotiation was the hardest. It involved a significant share, almost 8%. It belonged to my Uncle Alan, the most discreet one in the family. The only one who, in ancient times, had given me a look that didn't seem like contempt. He was sick, in need of money. And, ironically, he bargained the hardest. "This company still has value. I just need the right partner," he said, coughing between sentences. "We're willing to take care of it, Alan. Discreetly. Competently," my lawyer replied. He gave in, not out of trust, but out of exhaustion. And it was with that signature, that last piece of the puzzle, that everything changed. The next morning, I received the final report, a dossier with every fraction of ownership, and at the top, highlighted in bold, Grayworth Holdings, 51.3% active ownership. My heart beat slow and heavy, as if the world had gone silent for a second. After years of being told I was nothing, I was now everything, the true owner, and no one knew. But the most impressive part is that I'm still not done. The real game was still to begin. I was invited, or rather tolerated, to the Conway family's annual assembly, an event with more pomp than purpose, where everyone dressed as if they were posing for the cover of Forbes but acted like extras in a cheap drama. My name appeared on the list of minority shareholders, and that's why I was included, even if it was just to maintain the facade of family unity. The invitation came by email, terse, direct, with a PDF attachment and no greeting. No hey or hello, no personal signature. As if I were an annoying reminder. And maybe I was. A reminder of the past they never managed to erase. I arrived punctually at the Conway Industries headquarters in downtown Portland, as per the dress code they pretend to respect. I wore a navy blue blazer that fit perfectly on my shoulders and a tailored pant I bought with my first $1 million contract. No discount stores. But even if it had been, I'd still have more dignity than anyone there. In the lobby, Kate was waiting for me with that plastic smile, as perfect on the outside as she was rotten on the inside. "Ah, you came. How sweet," she said, and barely finishing the sentence, she added, loud enough for me to hear, "Try not to wear something that looks like it came from a discount store this time." She laughed, and the others laughed with her. Those synchronized laughs, soulless, like the click of a snob mode button. I simply smiled. A light, contained smile. The kind you save for the end of the game, when you know you've won and the others still haven't realized. We went up together to the meeting room. It was the same old hall, dark mahogany paneling, heavy curtains, hand-stitched leather armchairs, and the old portrait of the company's founder, Benjamin Conway, glaring at us with his judgmental stare. The air smelled familiar, a mix of waxed wood, French perfume, and hypocrisy. They spoke among themselves with the ease of people who believe they are among equals. I was just a foreign body taking up space in the corner chair, next to the wall. No eye contact, no formal greetings, nothing. The conference table seemed smaller that day. Or perhaps it was the hidden tension that made it feel tighter. At the center of the table, the chairman of the board, my Uncle Graham, spoke with his usual arrogance. He wore an embroidered silk tie and gestured confidently, as if he had absolute control over everything. "We have a new shareholder structure following the private acquisitions of the past few quarters," he said, with the firm voice of someone refusing to see the sand slipping through their fingers. "There is an institutional investor who has taken a majority position. Don't worry, we're negotiating favorable terms." There was a subtle murmur. Expressions shifted from fake tranquility to poorly disguised discomfort. I recognized that. It was fear dressed as superiority. A lawyer, with thinning hair and sunglasses, took the floor. The new majority shareholder preferred to remain anonymous at this time, but left a letter to be read in their absence. Graham furrowed his brow, impatient. "Another cowardly investor," he muttered. "These funds are always hiding behind clauses, and then expect us to clean up the mess." Kate rolled her eyes as if the idea of a stranger, a peasant, as she used to say, controlling the company was an affront to the Conway bloodline. "At least they should have the decency to show up," she commented, crossing her arms. "Or maybe they don't have the face for it," my Uncle Alan said in a dark tone. The lawyer opened the envelope with the solemnity of a priest before the sermon. He unfolded the paper carefully and began to read. "Dear board members, the decision to remain anonymous is not out of fear, but strategy. Over the past few quarters, I have watched with great attention the decisions made by this board. I have studied the numbers, analyzed contracts, assessed the impact of choices based more on vanity than vision. My intention with this acquisition is not hostile, but firm. I am here to rebuild, to bring order where there is disorganization, to eliminate what is decayed, and to bring to light what is still worth saving. The name Conway, although worn, still carries weight. But without responsibility, no name can stand. Prepare for changes. And remember, not all power needs a face to be real." Silence. Absolute silence. Not a single comment, no laughs, no jokes. For a second, all eyes shifted between one another, but none turned to me. It was strange to watch the scene as a spectator of my own victory. It was like watching an earthquake in slow motion, with the epicenter invisible. Graham was the first to compose himself. "Well, seems like we have an investor with opinions. Great, as long as they know their place." But there was something in his tone that betrayed him. A hint of doubt, of uncertainty. "Who do you think it is?" Kate asked, frowning. "It's not any of the funds we already know. Could be a masked competitor or some foreign group," Alan speculated. "Or someone from within," murmured my Aunt Vanessa. The first one to dare say aloud what perhaps everyone feared. And then, for the first time in years, they looked at me. Not out of obligation, not out of neglect. They looked at me as if, suddenly, my presence there had weight. "Sandra," said Graham in a drawn-out voice, "do you know any names behind this?" I tilted my head, feigning surprise. "Me? No. I'm just a minor shareholder. Discount store, remember?" I smiled sharply, but sweet enough not to raise any definitive suspicions. They smiled back, forced, nervous. The discomfort hung in the air, thick as the scent of Kate's perfume, because something, at that moment, began to change. A seed of suspicion was planted. They didn't know yet who had defeated them, but they already felt someone had. And the sweetest part? They only discovered at the end of that meeting that they no longer owned anything. But the full revelation was still to come. The company was different. The air, which once carried the sweet scent of expensive whiskey and poorly guarded secrets, now felt cleaner, denser. There was tension in it. And there was fear. A fear that didn't yet have a name but had already taken residence in the director's dark circles, in the slow steps of secretaries who overheard whispers in the hallways, in meetings that now lasted half the time and had 3 times as many furtive glances. Few knew yet what was coming, but those who knew were in silent panic. It was at the end of a cold Thursday in Portland, the kind of day when even the buildings seemed to want to hide, that the memo arrived. Full audit, as per the decision of the majority shareholder. Signed by Grayworth Holdings, my company. The document was clear, clinical, irrefutable. All departments were to cooperate fully. All contracts reviewed. All expenses justified. All personnel investigated. The chaos started subtly. First came the sideways glances. Then the whispers in once neutral hallways. And then the emails, calls for meetings on short notice, private messaging groups popping up trying to understand what the hell was happening. The following week, 3 directors were removed, all temporarily, according to the official statement. But everyone knew that temporarily was the new euphemism for "we're screwed." The accounting began to cough up numbers that didn't add up. There was an infrastructure project in Eugene that seemed to cost 3 times what it should have. A partnership with the state that had suspicious addendums signed by a now-retired executive, but whose signature appeared on recent documents. Duplicate payments. Outsourcing without bidding. Bonuses for directors' relatives under code names. Nothing forged, nothing planted. It was all theirs. The ground started to tremble, and the first to try to hold on was my cousin Scott. Scott always thought of himself as a natural leader. The son of Graham, the direct grandson of the founder, one of those who sat at the head of the table as if it had been made just for him. He wore tailored suits and spoke with that tired tone of someone who believes he is always right and that everyone else is a disappointment. In the 3rd week of the audit, he stormed into the conference room during an emergency board meeting. "This is an attack. It's internal sabotage," he shouted, slamming his hand on the oak table as if that could bring back the respect he had lost. No one responded. The lawyer, a thin man in a dark suit with a contained expression, simply slid a new dossier to the center of the table. It was a 140-page report. Name, Project Pine Hill. "What is this?" Kate asked, frowning. "A ghost project. Millions allocated. 0 real execution. Signed by Scott Conway. Approved by the board without question. Documents now in the possession of the IRS and the Oregon Prosecutor's Office." Scott turned pale. "Whoever this new shareholder is destroying the soul of Conway," he screamed in desperation. I raised my eyes. The soul, Scott? The soul had been rotten for decades, but no one knew that the true revelation was still to come. A new extraordinary meeting was scheduled, this time with the mandatory presence of all remaining shareholders, directors, and legal representatives. In the conference room, the seats were taken, but no one seemed comfortable. Even Graham, once unshakable, had his fingers drumming on the wood like an old commander facing a mutiny. The lawyer opened the folder. His voice was clear, precise. As per the new board's decision and based on the corporate transparency rights, the name behind Grayworth Holdings must be disclosed. Everyone held their breath. I knew. I felt it. This was the moment. He pulled out the letterhead. Read slowly. Parent company, Grayworth Holdings. CEO and majority shareholder, Sandra Conway. Silence. Not the uncomfortable, respectful, or even awkward silence. It was a vacuum, as if everyone had been sucked into a reality they couldn't comprehend. The eyes turned to me, some wide, others trying to deny it. There was anger, there was surprise, there was shame, but no regret. There had never been any. Graham was the first to speak, but his voice failed. "This is impossible." "She couldn't have," said Kate, standing up. "Sandra, this is illegal. You don't have the right to—" "To what?" I interrupted, standing up for the first time without looking down. My voice was steady, no tremor, calm, like a storm that has already passed. "I didn't need to steal. I didn't need to lie. I just needed you to ignore me long enough." Silence. I walked to the edge of the table. "While you were busy indulging in dirty contracts, supplier-funded trips, and $1,000 dinners with company money, I was building something real." Kate took a step forward. "You deceived us." "No," I replied. "You deceived yourselves." I stopped and stared at them, one by one. "You called me a failure, a poor girl. You laughed at my clothes, my apartment, my company. Because you were dead weight, a name with no legacy," Scott shot back. "And now this dead weight owns all of this." I paused, took a deep breath. "This audit will continue, and those responsible will be held accountable, not to get revenge. This isn't personal no matter what you think. It's about justice. It's about returning real value to this company. It's about breaking the cycle of corruption and arrogance that killed the Conway name." They expected something else. They expected shouting, maybe tears. They expected negotiation, desperation, pleading. But all they got was a fact. Incontestable. I won. And there in that room, for the first time, I was seen not as the failed girl who lived in a rented room, but as what I had become, the woman who rebuilt an empire, alone. But I wasn't finished there. Not with them looking at me like that, because the next step, the most painful and necessary, was still to come. The room was dense, the atmosphere heavy like a storm about to break. Each of us there knew the moment of truth had arrived. The final confrontation, the last opportunity for those at the table to decide their fate. My fate was already sealed, but theirs, well, there was still time to choose. I, Sandra Conway, had finally gained control. That control that had always been denied to me, but now was rightfully mine. And, in a cruel irony, by merit. The gazes of my Uncle Graham, Kate, Scott, and the others present were fixed on me. They felt defeated, but were still unwilling to admit it. It wasn't just wounded pride. It was their complete inability to accept that someone so irrelevant, so inferior in their eyes, could have checkmated them. Their arrogance had blinded them to the real game. They still thought they could flip the board in their favor, and they were about to discover how wrong they were. I stood up. The only sound that filled the room was the faint rustling of the paper I held in my hands. My eyes, fixed on Graham, conveyed a chilling calm. I was in absolute control. They couldn't see it anymore. If they wanted a fight, then they would have one. Resign voluntarily. Hand over the documents you're hiding. Let this company breathe, I said, with a voice that didn't sound like a threat but a fair proposal. An irresistible offer, actually. My Uncle Graham let out a low, almost nervous laugh. He tried to appear superior, but his eyes couldn't hide the panic beginning to take hold of him. "You don't have the courage. You don't have the stomach for corporate warfare," he said, trying to sneer, but his voice faltered. There was something in him that was breaking. Ah, Graham. He had always been the arrogant one, the one who believed the world worked the way he said it did. The patriarch of the family, the commander of a dynasty that only existed in the glorified memories he himself had cultivated. How dare he doubt me? How could he not see that the war had already been won? "You really don't understand, do you?" I continued, with the same cold calm. "This isn't about courage. It never was. This isn't about who has more stomach for the fight. This is about who has more patience, who knows how to wait, Who has more vision? And quite simply, Graham, you've already lost. The war is over. The room became even quieter. The words echoed like thunder in a cloudless sky. They were in shock. They didn't know how to react. My uncle, who saw himself as all-powerful, was silent, unsure of how to turn the situation around. Kate, always so quick to attack, didn't even know what to say. I could feel the tension in the room. Scott, my cousin, seemed still in denial. His face was red, his breath shallow, trying to keep control. He was used to being a pawn in his father's schemes. He had never been challenged head-on. "You don't have the slightest idea what you're saying," Scott said with a trembling voice, forcing a smile that didn't fit his face. "This isn't a game, Sandra. This is our family, our company." "Our family? Our company?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "The family that humiliated me my entire life? The company that you and your father sank with corruption and lies? That's what you want to call ours?" The words left my mouth like sharp knives, cutting through everyone's illusions. What had been built over so many years with manipulation and disregard was crumbling before my eyes. I knew that the truth, no matter how painful, was the only thing that mattered now. "Let's not be hypocrites, Scott. Or better yet, maybe we should be," I continued. "Because deep down, we all know who you and the others really are." Kate tried to recover from the initial shock and spoke, but her voice no longer had the confidence it once did. There was anger, but also fear. And I saw it in her expression. "You think you're going to expose us like this? That you're going to destroy our reputation with a simple move? That you'll end everything we've built?" I took a step in her direction, the growing tension in the room almost palpable. "Yes, because the only thing you've built is a facade that is now crumbling, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." I breathed deeply. "This company will be cleansed. The corruption you left as a legacy will be exposed, and the guilty will pay for their crimes. But the hardest part, the hardest for me and at the same time the most liberating, was still to come. The final moment. What I needed to say to finally close that chapter once and for all. I could have ended it there, leaving the room in silence, but no. I knew I had to say one last thing. Something personal. Something that, while related to everyone there, only applied to me. I took a deep breath, looking each of them directly in the eye. One by one, I was ready. "And for you, my dear ones, none of this is personal. It's not revenge. It's not a desire to destroy your lives. The truth is that what you did to me was more than simple negligence. It was the building of a chain of lies. I am who I am today because of everything you did. And honestly, I've never been more grateful for that." The words hung in the air, heavier than any threat. Because it wasn't just the end of a corporate cycle. It was the end of my emotional slavery to this family. And then, with no empty words, I turned. It no longer mattered what they had to say. I was leaving. But before I did, I needed to make it clear that even though the battle was won, one last point still had to be made. I renounced the last tie I had with you. And I let the words fall like a sentence. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to take care of what really matters. And then, as I looked at the room one last time, an indescribable feeling took over me. I no longer needed their approval. Not anymore. I had earned my freedom, my identity, and finally, my peace. And with that, I left them behind. In the last meeting, the atmosphere was heavy, tense, like a battlefield right after the last explosion. Each of us was there, but no one seemed truly present. Graham, the patriarch of the family, sat at the center, his impeccable black suit, rigid posture, and defiant gaze. Scott, my cousin, always the obedient son, but now seemed lost, as if he had fallen off a great cliff and was trying to figure out where he was standing. Kate, Scott's sister, her eyes burning with anger but lacking the courage to act. Everyone there seemed to be waiting for some kind of confrontation, perhaps a shout from me, a demand. But no, I had learned that my greatest strength was never physical or emotional confrontation. My real weapon had always been silence. When I walked into the room, everyone looked at me. A mix of surprise, fear, and perhaps a little regret. Not that they were ready to admit it. It was a silent shame, something that crept into every glance, but no one dared to express it in words. They knew what was coming, but no one knew what I would do with the opportunity they gave me. I walked to the table. The atmosphere was so tense it felt like you could cut it with a knife. The smell of coffee still lingered in the air, a futile attempt to bring some comfort to the moment. There was no comfort anywhere. I looked at each of them, and for a moment, I thought of everything I had done to get there, everything I had endured. I took the letter from my jacket pocket and placed it gently on the table. Each of my relatives fixed their eyes on the letter, and I could feel Kate's hands trembling, trying to maintain composure. But I didn't blame anyone. They were the reflection of a system that fed on others' weaknesses, that thrived on inequality and shame. "Read it," I said softly, but firmly. I didn't need to shout. That wasn't what I wanted. They knew they didn't need words to understand the weight of it. They hesitated for a moment, but their gazes returned to the letter, as if the very idea of avoiding it was a heresy. Finally, it was Kate who picked up the letter and read it aloud, her voice trembling. "You taught me what it was like to be disposable. You showed me what it was like to be invisible. Today my name is worth more than yours, because I reclaimed it without needing anyone's approval. Sandra." I watched each of their faces as she finished reading. There was a strange feeling in the air, as if time had stopped for a moment. The silence in the room grew dense. The anger that had once been evident on Graham's face was now replaced with a deeper frustration. He didn't understand what was happening. I had won, without a direct fight, without a single shout, without a single tear. The power I had now was beyond their comprehension. Scott was visibly shaken. I could see his trembling hands as he tried to keep his gaze steady. Kate was stiff, as if she wanted to scream but had no words. My family had always seen me as a burden, a fraud, a joke. My eyes scanned their faces, but I felt no anger, not anymore. I was beyond that. "Now you know," I said calmly, my voice controlled, without bitterness, but relentless. "I spent years being treated like a shadow, a person of no importance, a person of no value. But what you never understood was that by making me invisible, by discarding me, you gave me the greatest gift of all, the freedom to be who I truly am." Graham opened his mouth as if to speak, but hesitated. He had always had control of the situation, always had the right words to make anyone feel small. But he knew that now, I was more than capable of destroying him, not with brute force, but with the strength of knowledge. With the strength of having made the right choices, even when no one believed in me. "I'm no longer the Sandra I used to be," I said, almost to myself. "That girl you called a failure, that girl you called poor, that girl you pushed aside. Today, I'm someone who rebuilt everything from scratch, without your help, without needing anyone's approval." I took a step back, still observing the room full of confused gazes. "And that's why, in the end, my name is worth more than all of yours. Because it carries something your names will never have: honesty, work, and a real story, from someone who did it all on her own." I stood silent for a moment, letting my words settle in the air, like dust finally settling after a storm. The power of my words was in their simplicity. I didn't need a dramatic revenge. I didn't need to make a scandal or a scene. I won in the quietest way possible, with patience, with intelligence, with strategy. What I did was actually much more than simply destroy. I revealed them to the world, and they destroyed themselves in the end. Before leaving, I looked one last time at each of them. My gaze was the only one that didn't falter, the only one that had nothing to hide. They were naked, exposed in their hypocrisy, their arrogance, their corruption. I went home alone, as always. But it wasn't a bitter loneliness. It wasn't a loneliness of frustration or hopelessness. It wasn't the kind of loneliness that made me cry every night in the past. Now that loneliness was comforting. It was a peace I never knew existed. because for the first time, I was completely at peace with myself. I knew I had achieved what I always wanted, my place in the world, without needing approval, without depending on anyone's validation. I didn't destroy the Conways. They did that on their own. I just turned on the light. Would you have the courage to do what I did? To stand up against those who have always belittled you, who called you a failure and never believed in you? Would you be able to build your own path without needing anyone's approval, even when everyone around you tells you that you won't make it? The truth is that many times we are led to believe that we need the approval of others to move forward, to reach our goals. But deep down, the only validation that truly matters is our own. When we free ourselves from the pressure to please others, when we accept that our journey is unique, that's when we truly start living for ourselves. That's the lesson I've learned over time. And by doing so, I realized that true strength doesn't come from what others think, but from who we are and what we choose to be. If you liked this story, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for more content like this. I want to know a little more about you. Leave your name, your age, and where you're watching this story from in the comments. And if you want more of a female revenge dose, don't waste time. Click on the video that's showing on the screen now to watch another story that will leave you even more surprised. See you next time.